How you doing, everybody? This is Kurt Henry at the Mortgage Center with Randy Henry, and we're a part of a mortgage brokerage. Our job is basically to work with multiple banks and lenders, and our job is to get them to compete for our clients to get the best deal. This is a weekly mortgage update just to let you know what's going on in the mortgage market. In terms of mortgage rates, a fixed rate is around 3.94%, or in and around there. There's a few lenders that might be a little bit a touch lower, but just depending on the situation. And a variable rate is around prime minus 0.75, which is 2.25%. I also wanted to touch base on how to buy an acreage property, because it's a little bit different than buying, say, a subdivision house. So when you're buying a subdivision house, for example, let's just say you're buying a $100,000 house. A lot of times the bank will say, okay, we'll do a mortgage of 95% of the purchase price or of the value. So if you're buying a $100,000 house, a lot of times the bank will say, okay, we think the value is $100,000 because you're buying it for $100,000. Kind of with some nuances sometimes with that thinking, but for the most part, when you're buying a house, a lot of times that's the value because there's a buyer that's willing to pay that amount for it, and therefore that's the value. Like I say, there can be times when that's not the case though. So let's just say it's a normal case like that. If you're buying it for $100,000, the value is $100,000. The bank is going to give 95% of $100,000, which is $95,000, and therefore the borrower or the buyer has to have a 5% down payment, which is $5,000. So that's pretty simple. Now, if somebody's buying an acreage property, let's just say, for example, you're buying a $100,000 house on 20 acres. So there's 20 acres included in this property. What will happen is the bank is only going to use a certain number of acres in their valuation. So they don't use all of the acres. So depending on the bank, some will use 5 acres, others will use 10 acres, others will use 15 acres, and others will use more than that, just depending on the situation. But the way it works is that if you're buying a $100,000 house with 20 acres, let's just say, for example, the bank is only going to count 5 acres. Well, therefore, if they're only counting 5 acres in their valuation, they might say, well, that $100,000 property is actually only worth $90,000 because they're only using 5 acres. In other words, they're ignoring the other 15 acres on this 20-acre property. So they might value it based on $90,000, and why that's important is because they're going to give a mortgage based on their value. So if they're giving a 95% mortgage value based on the value, then they're only giving 95% of $90,000 because that's the value that they valued it at. So 95% of $90,000 is $85,500, meaning that they're going to give a mortgage of $85,500. But we already know that the person is buying the property for $100,000. So therefore, the person or the buyer needs to come up with the difference. So instead of having a 5% down payment and therefore it being $5,000, now the buyer has to have the more down payment. So in this case, they would have to have a down payment of $14,500 because the bank is only giving 95% of $90,000 instead of 95% of $100,000. So that's kind of how it works with acreage properties. If you have any questions on that, the best way to get answers is to ask the person that gave you this video or sent you this video. And if you have any other questions, feel free to give us a call. The number at the office here is 905-436-8010. Thanks, and have a great day.